Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy podcast. This is the last episode of 2023, and it is also an episode looking back at your favorite 2023 episodes. I hope this year has been awesome for you. It's been amazing here for me as well as for the show. It's been a year of unprecedented growth in many different ways, which I'll talk about here in just a second. But also, we've covered more ground, I think, in topics and in types of presentations this year in 2023 than we ever have on the show before, and it's got me really excited about 2024. So, of course, another year on the show has come to close, and in this episode, I have collected some short clips. That's one of the new things that has happened in 2023 is the show is now on TikTok, which means that I have pre-made tons of little short clips from all the episodes from this year, or most of them anyway, and we'll have clips of every episode going forward because we've got that process streamlined. And so this episode's going to actually have the top 10 list as well as a little couple minutes of sample from each of those episodes so that you can remember some of the ones that happened in 2023 that were popular with the audience, as well as if you didn't catch it, you'll get a little flavor of that episode. So how do I pick my top 10 episodes? The criteria is a little bit complex because, of course, the longer the episode sits on the podcast feed, the longer people have to find it. So I can't just go by purely downloads and streams only because then everything from back in January and February is going to win. So my rubric now includes a little bit of a complex system. I look at total downloads and streams. I look at that number compared to the other episodes that are in the date range of that episode. I also look for which episodes got to 1,000 listeners the fastest. So generating some type of a buzz, and also which episodes had created the most social media splash. So in deciding the top 10 list, as I go through and introduce each one, I'll kind of give you an idea of how each episode got there. And then, of course, when the episode's done, I hope you will go on social media to the Choralosopher's Facebook page and or any of the posts related to this episode and drop your personal favorites, even if they don't appear on this top 10 list, especially if they don't appear, because there were some awesome episodes. Choosing this top 10 is very difficult and in some ways, as I described, a little bit arbitrary. So you should throw your favorite episodes in the comments as well. And don't forget, you can apply to appear in 2024 on the show by going to choralosophy.com and filling out the form there on the main page. As we put a bow on this year, it's also important that you remember that there are really important things that you do to make sure that this show can keep going in 2024 and beyond. And it, of course, involves using the Choralosophy checkout code at sightreadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, mychoirrobes.com, and sheet music at Endeavor musicpublishing.com and graphitepublishing.com. All of those purchases, which are great for your choral classroom, also help me a lot keeping the show going. And of course, the Patreon page is huge, as well as just telling your friends and sharing the episodes and participating in the conversation so people can see it. Are you tired of managing multiple platforms to sell tickets, fundraise, and market your performances? Look no further than Ludus.com, an all-in-one solution that's easy to use and free to your organization. With Ludus, you'll have access to a suite of tools and resources specifically designed for the performing arts. From ticket sales to merchandise and fundraising, Ludus has got you covered. So why not give it a try? Save time, money, and resources. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. The show is produced on Patreon by Venture Studios, Ryan Main, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Stephen Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, John Warner, Angie Schilling, Nathan Hines, Jared Hendricks, Brian Long, and Jonah Clixbull. So earlier I mentioned that the TikTok is a relatively new part of the Choralosophy platform. However, you can find those newly generated and continuously generated clips on the YouTube channel. You can also find them on Instagram. You can find them on Facebook as well. So I encourage you to do that. Other interesting and fun things that have happened in 2023, of course, we welcomed our first presenting sponsor, which is Ludus. You hear those ads within the first few minutes of each episode, and I continue to be just overwhelmed by how awesome this product is. So if you have not gone to the link in the show notes, that is the ludus.com/choralosophy, that's very helpful for you because the product's awesome, but it's also very helpful to me just so they see that you're listening and that you're interested in the products that I talk to you about. They are an awesome company for ticket sales, for fundraising, for a variety of other types of marketing for your organization and your school choir. There's a lot of things that I've started using it for, so I encourage you to head over there. Other fun things is the Facebook page grew from like 3,500 likes, where it had just been kind of sitting at about 3,500 for, I don't know, a year or so. And then it just shot up to over 5,000 people within the last month and a half. Part of that is on the strength of a viral video of my classroom where I showed my mostly 10th grade girls group sight reading without any teacher help, a level 7 3-part sight reading factory exercise where they did our routine for what is normal in about November of each school year for them to be pretty self-sufficient and not needing any teacher correction. And I put a video of our 4-minute process online, and it is still getting shared. Probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 500-600 shares, and I don't know, something like close to 200,000 views on Facebook, and it did well on TikTok as well. So as a result, people from all over the world have found the show in the last few months. So that's exciting. So just a fun time for content creation, but also a fun time for growing the conversation, which is the point here at Choralosophy. Okay, let's jump into the top 10 list. At number 1, we have the top episode of the year on all the platforms, episode 135, the Acapella Rehearsal. Now, this was an episode that was a presentation that I gave at Colorado Music Educators that was, I think, very helpful for people in its practical, but also in its philosophical approach to teaching of music literacy. And of course, in addition to that, I should probably mention that I created the choralosophy.com/music literacy website, the subpage of my website, where all the music literacy resources are now collected in one place. And I think that also had a big impact on the numbers of this on this episode. So here are some moments from the top episode of 2023. By the end of that school year, those 9th and 10th graders in every musicianship category were more advanced than the 11th and 12th graders in one school year. So the next school year, I took over the program. My predecessor retired. And I took that learning experience and said, okay, we're ripping off the Band-Aid. Starting now, we are not going to play the piano anymore. So this presentation, I'm going to jump right in now, is essentially a quick walkthrough of what that looks like now after many years of me kind of tweaking this process and creating a real step-by-step program for the students. So here's what we imagine doing as the class is beginning of the school year. Now, I will oftentimes when I give a presentation about this, have to make the caveat that I teach 9th graders who do come from a feeder middle school where they know some stuff. They are not already reading a cappella, okay? But they do know what a quarter note is, and they know, they've seen a sight reading exercise, but they've not been asked to sing it independently. They've not been asked to read it a cappella, but I understand that not everyone gets kids with any prior knowledge at all. So what you would want to imagine is that you're taking the ideas that I'm going to give you today and think, okay, well, where are my kids starting? And we just get an idea like an elementary school reading specialist would about what is the current reading level of this kid. And we make a spreadsheet with every kid's name. Here's what happened in that first attempt to sight read, assign them to a level that is their goal for the end of first semester. And from that point on, every time they're reading, our expectation is simply that they are making progress through their levels. At number 2 on the list is one of those more recent episodes. Episode 176, Cementing the Spiritual in American Art with Dr. Andre Thomas, jumped out quickly to 1,000 viewers, almost within the first week. About 8 days is all it took to get about 1,000 people to listen to that episode. Now, that came on the strength of a very popular post about the topic in the American Choral Directors Association Facebook group. So a lot of people saw that. Again, I always talk about the power of sharing the episodes. When people share the episodes, more people hear it, more people see it. That episode with Dr. Thomas is very important, and I hope that thousands more, I know at this point, thousands more will come across that episode over the course of the next year. So if you have not heard it yet, I would check it out. Here's a little moment from that episode. If we're going to make this art form not disappear, This is going to come out kind of strange, but stick with me here. We need white choral directors to be on board with this. We're 70% of the country. We're 70% of the country. It's just math. So right now, the hesitancy of white directors in getting involved, for reasons I said before, of being afraid to be criticized and being afraid to be told that we did it wrong, and all of that. I think that's the nut that I find the hardest to crack, because and you mentioned, I'm really glad you did. You kind of earlier you brought up the political aspect of it. In Florida, we have the Ron DeSantis issue, and I agree that there is that side of the equation, but there is a side of the equation that comes from the other side too, and some of that comes from the social justice activist person who gets on the internet and loudly proclaims to us white choral directors that music is not for us, and that comes also through to our students at schools. That's actually a really common one I get from white students. Should we be singing this?
Yeah.
So I agree with you about the Ron DeSantis side of the equation, but I'm also interested in, I feel like we're getting this from both sides, discouragement from doing it. Thoughts about that?
You're probably not going to get that from Black musicians, for the most part.
No, correct.
You're going to only get that from people who, the closest they come to any music about their ancestors is to maybe get back to Motown. Okay. Yeah, that's our music, Maybe they can get that far back. They can't go much further back, Who cares about Ella Fitzgerald and that whole group of people, But that's probably as far back as they're going. Most of them go back to only Whitney Houston, okay? So that's all they know.
Right.
That's all they know. And they know about that we came from an enslaved group of people. And I understand that, because I felt the same way as a kid when I heard this music. And teachers said to me, make up the solo here. You know how you guys do that. I hated that music.
Yeah.
I mean, and what bothered me the most about that music was the dialect. It wasn't actually the music itself. It was the dialect, which implied that something was ignorant. They couldn't even speak the language, is ignorant, and so that, especially when you're growing up and you got a parent saying, you're going to be somebody, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And then you got somebody on the other hand saying, okay, sing these songs. Okay. Now, if the person who said, sing these songs, could have explained it to me in the same way that Chester Harrison explained it to me, I would have felt differently about it.
At number 3 on the list, we have episode 146, The Vibrato Question, with Dr. Janaea Robison. Now, this episode was unique in a lot of ways. One, it came from a presentation at the American Choral Directors Association that I saw in person. And I sat there listening to it, immediately thinking this needs to be an episode. So I invited Janaea, who lives in Kansas City near me, to come to my house and have this conversation. So the video version was popular because it's compelling in that she is in my studio, as well as the conversation was wide-ranging on this topic of the use of vibrato in choral singing. Here are some moments. Because ultimately, when we're talking about antiquity, we're talking about people who had time to not be groveling for all of their calories to survive the day.
Right, yeah.
Those were your artists.
Right.
So being an artist at all meant you were in the privileged class.
Right.
Okay. So I just don't get the idea of casting aside artistic value on that basis, or else we're going to throw a lot of babies out with a lot of bathwater.
Yeah, I totally understand. I think on the other side of things, if you are part of that element that would have been excluded or would be excluded now because of the intrinsic properties that you have in your voice, is there a way for us to interpret what they did hundreds of years ago? And I'm speaking, mostly about vibrancy in a way that does create a welcoming space for more voices than just this specific type.
Just to go back to the history aspect of it too, I would have been excluded also, by the way. So,
but maybe you would have been in some way, part of the church and, found, a home there. And so you could have been a budding,
if someone had discovered, if someone had discovered my, like, some kind of musical aptitude and I got lucky and pulled out of the gutter, then yes, that very well could have been, you're right. But I would make completely different decisions if I was doing that with an adult professional ensemble that had the goal of having the music sound the way the composer intended.
And I think, one of the compelling reasons why I started thinking about creating this interest session was an article that I saw that Maria Isabel Valverde wrote years ago that really resonated with me. And so how much of that, our modern lens, can we view this music through? And I do absolutely subscribe to the idea of doing things in a historically informed way, but knowing that, as women or people of color or people who were of a certain social class, we wouldn't have sung this music. Do we need to adhere to an antiquated set of standards that were not as welcoming as what we have now?
At number 4, we have episode 136, Remaking History, with Dr. Marcus Garrett. This was part of the Oxford series on the show, which is a collaboration with Oxford University Press to bring you some great episodes. But this episode was another one that was live here in my studio when Marcus was coming through town, and we had a really great conversation about the work that he's been doing, bringing the music of Black composers, especially the non-idiomatic Black composers, to our attention and kind of recreating what our thought about the choral music canon can and should be. The conversation was also very candid and open, as all of our conversations were here, and I think it resonated with a lot of folks.
I mean, of course, my bias, because of my research areas with Black composers, but there's so many other composers and so many other cultures that haven't been represented. But then I also then start having, and if I get in trouble about this, oh well, I think it's the right podcast for it.
True.
Also understanding that in an attempt to diversify, it also means that you still have to include everyone. I mean, because some of my closest friends are white.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to be excluded. Or, if a white person wants to teach or to do a conference presentation on culturally responsive teaching, they should be able to, because this may be shocking for some people, but white people have culture too.
Yes.
And but I do understand that for the longest time, everything was skewed one way, but it doesn't mean just completely remove all of that, because then you get the issue of people saying, oh, well, now we're being erased and now our voices don't matter and that kind of stuff. And then it just makes the problem even worse.
It kicks the... At number 5 on the list, kind of falling into the category of practical but also fascinating episodes, was number 160, Practical Vocal Acoustics, with Professor Ken Bozeman. Ken is a voice expert and voice science expert who came on to talk about some great ways that we as teachers of singing could talk about some of the science aspects of singing in a more accurate way, but also in a way that is more effective in getting kids and young adults and young singers especially to make the sounds that we are trying to make. Here are some moments from episode 160. If I were to sing "ee" and then ask a bunch of high school students, what vowel did I just sing? They're going to say "e," and then I'll say, actually, right. No, there was "oo" in there as well. And they'll be like, "nuh-uh." And then, right. and then I'll prove it. And then it kind of opens their mind to the idea that the vocal acoustics aspect is so much more complicated than they thought, and then they can start to listen for those things as well. It's kind of like a shortcut, a hack.
They probably will never be able to hear the ooh and an e in our voices, but they would be able to in a high enough voice, because you'll begin once you go to whoop timbre, you can really hear that fundamental. But you can filter it out and show it to them.
That's what I mean.
For example, here's one that I use that I got from a colleague in Boston, but I'm sure she got it somewhere else too. This is just things you grab from the culture, like you did with that one, which is the toddler "I want my mommy" affect. I want my mommy. It completely throws me into my head voice, and I'm kind of, going to that, want my mommy. I want my mommy. That's one that I use. It will definitely throw you into laryngeal head voice, smoother registration, but I'm still using speech, so I'm getting my vowels, right?
At number 6 on the list is another one of my Colorado music educators' presentations. This one was episode 137, Literacy is Equity. It's also part of that Choralosophy music literacy suite. In this episode, I talk a little bit more about the neuroscience and also the moral arguments for why teaching music literacy is really not an option if you're going to be considering yourself or thinking of yourself as a quality music educator. And I got some pushback for sure over the course of the year. I got some, that sounds really harsh. I got some, I'm uncomfortable with, ranking music teachers as quality and not quality. And of course, those types of feedbacks I always just kind of scoff at, because of course there are quality and not quality music educators. There are quality and not quality everything. And it's our job as a profession to kind of outline our case for what is and what is not quality. So that's essentially what I did in this episode. I made the moral argument and the scientific argument for why music education should be centering literacy, not specifically sight reading, which is a type of literacy and a way that literacy manifests itself, but literacy in a broad context should be part of our music education, I guess, hierarchy, for the lack of a better word. So here are some moments from episode 137. And I think that's where some of the disconnect happens. It's how we think about what it is that we're doing. So not all cultures notate their music. And this has some people uncomfortable with the idea that a vocal music class should center and make one of its core curricular aspects the reading of the music. Okay? So I understand why people think that. I just think it's misguided. We are complex creatures, humans. We can hold competing ideas in our minds at the same time. It's really fascinating. Now on Facebook you can't, but in our own minds, you can hold these different ideas. So there is a downstream, like, what's the point of me teaching kids literacy? Yeah, I want my choir to be better, because I know that if the choir is better, more kids will sign up for choir, which means that the value of the subject I'm teaching that I believe in is going to pull more kids in, and then they get the benefit of all this, right? It's all connected. At number 7 on the list, we have episode 171, The Culture of Choral Musicianship, with David Hill. Now, David has a fan club, apparently, especially over in the UK. David's episode jumped out to a whole bunch of new audience members that did not know the Choralosophy podcast, because it got shared a whole bunch by our British choral folks, and it drove the episode way up in the downloads and views. And so thank you to David's loyal entourage over there. He is the director of the Bach Choir, and we had a great conversation about kind of the past, present, and future of choral musicianship as a culture that we have to build within our ecosystems, why people respect us less than instrumental musicians, for example, and what we can do about that, and how we can lead our choirs in such a way that they deserve and earn that respect. Now, you mentioned BBC singers there, and of course, recently, a lot of choral music fans around the world would recognize that there was some controversy surrounding BBC singers and funding loss, and a big pushback to save the choir. What was your take on all of that?
That's it. And I, in my small way, of course, I just joined what ended up being tens of thousands, probably now hundreds of thousands from around the world, who were kind of just aghast with incredulity as to why you would, in the corporation, which is the BBC, why they want to just lose 18 singers from their roster of 500 professional musicians.
At number 8, we have episode 152, Prioritizing Context and Connection, with Zenaida Robles. This is another Oxford Press episode, and it did really, really well. I think my personal opinion of why this one did well was, again, just a really open and raw conversation with a musician that many of us know and composer that many of us respect, and we see a lot about her and we hear a lot about her, but having her just open up and show us the real Zenaida, I think is what the recipe for success for this episode was. If you missed it, I strongly encourage you to check it out. Here are some moments.
One thing that I think about, and if you don't mind, I'm curious if you have a thought about this too, because on the flip side, I often think about, okay, I wonder what it's like for like cishet white males who are being told, no, thanks, we don't need your voice, any more of your voice. Does that ever come into play?
I get told that all the time.
What's that like? How do you deal with it?
I get told that all the time, but that's partly part of the nature of me putting my opinion on the internet about stuff all the time. So like, that's the nature of my job. And so I got used to that really quickly. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that, because in some ways I've developed a thick skin about it. But here's how I would answer that question in general, is that everyone is something more than what you see. Everyone is.
Yep.
And that includes straight white males.
Yeah.
We are also more than what you see when you look at us. And to me, that's the concept that should be more prevalent, in that I'm dealing with an individual here. I'm not dealing with an avatar for a group. I'm dealing with an individual here, whether I'm talking to a person who checks any identity box. Is that those identity boxes are part of who they are, but it's not the whole picture. And I think in our politically charged world right now, to be honest, it's white straight males we're not encouraged to also give us that kind of assumption. At number 9, we have episode 172, Dispelling Middle School Myths. In this episode, I had 2 guests. The audience, as you listen, will bounce back and forth between Ian Henning and Jacob Garcia. They are each middle school choir directors who, within the last year, have picked up on some of the Choralosophy, classroom management, and music literacy concepts, as well as assessment concepts that I've been presenting on over the last couple of years. And they have kind of, well, for my term, ripped off the Band-Aid and jumped right in to creating a new classroom culture using some of these ideas, and have had wild amounts of success. So they came on to talk about that, especially in the context of the feedback that I get from a lot of these ideas, which is, oh, that's fine for your privileged high school choir that does this, but not my middle school kids are not ready for this yet, or they're not developmentally ready for this yet, or my kids can't ... And I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that these things are possible at any age, including middle school. So both of these guys come on to talk about their grade 6 through 8 programs in 2 very different types of places having some success with solid pedagogy. And I've had people like accuse me of something tantamount to abuse because I require kids to sing alone and in small groups. And in my experience, it is the opposite of that. Yes. It is the opposite of that. It makes kids feel so powerful, especially the ones who were the most scared, because they learn that they can do hard things. And if I have to kind of drag them over the finish line, so to speak, the first time, so that they can learn that, it's without exception something that goes by as they take my class for 3 or 4 years, that they look back on their first singing test and how scared they were the very first time, and they look back on it and think, wow, I can't believe I was ever afraid to do that.
Love independence. They love not needing me. They love mastering this skill and then applying it and then performing it, and knowing that along no point of that journey was Mr. Henning the person who made it possible. In the sense that I gave them the tools that they need to teach themselves their music. Sure, I'm the gatekeeper. I don't know how I would get them to teach themselves the skills that they need to teach themselves, but I'm getting too far into the weeds here. But
you're right.
They love learning a piece of music, start to finish, using their pencil, their sheet music, their sight reading skills, their solfege, because it's so, I don't know how to describe it. Like, the autonomy that they get that they just don't get in other classrooms.
And finally, number 10 on the list is episode 163, Maslow's Sailboat. Now, 2023 was the year of the psychologist on the podcast. We had several different psychologists come on the show, but probably the most famous and well-known of all of those is Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, who came on for episode 163 for two main reasons. One, to tell his choir story. Dr. Kaufman was a choir kid, and in many ways credits his choir teacher and his choir class experience with turning his whole educational experience around, making him the successful academic and author and more that he is today. We also talk a lot about the education system's misunderstandings about Maslow's hierarchy and the whole Maslow's triangle not being a real thing, and that was invented by some corporate trainer years later. And we had that conversation about how education gets it wrong, as he is one of the most well-known experts on Maslow in the field of psychology. Here are some moments from that episode.
I think that in high school, once I got unleashed, I think I probably became arrogant. I went from like totally shy and like introverted and like couldn't talk to anyone. I felt like a loser, to when I discovered that I had this talent. I think I overcompensated. Some of my friends from high school, this is what they tell me. They say that I came in there like to the choir, you know, kind of like they've been in it their whole lives, and I just came in and I was like, to me it was like over enthusiasm, but to them it was like, who is this kid coming in here, you know, thinking he's such hot shit. But they didn't know my whole backstory. They didn't know that it's not like I thought like I was hot shit. I just was like so excited that I was like good at something. A lot of people, unfortunately, these days are really disconnected from themselves. That can happen through trauma. I think that's a common outcome of trauma, is you feel a disconnection from yourself. But it can happen in so many other ways. It can happen when we're not living by our values. It can happen when we're out of touch with what are our values. Who are we? You know, what do we want out of life, or a purpose, you know, or a calling? But I think that the good news and the hope there is that I think that we really become instantly connected to ourself. It can happen, you know, very quickly once we snap into a calling, or things start to make more sense for us in our lives, and we start to feel more grounded and understanding who we are and what we really are about in this life.
Thanks everyone for sticking around to the end of that little review episode. I hope that you found something there that you missed in 2023 and will consider going back to look at it on the way out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave ratings, leave comments. In 2024, in February, we're going to have the 5-year anniversary of the show, in which we're going to be reviewing some of the impacts that the show has made over the course of the first 5 years of its existence. So stay tuned for that. See you soon.